Hey guys, Jessica here and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a great day. So for this video, it is part of the Art Impressions blog post that I did, and I'll have a link to that blog post down below if you want to check that out also. I was inspired by the pop art movement. It has such a fun summery vibe to me, and since today is the first day of summer, I thought it would be fun to play off of the pop art design. So what I'm using is one of the Windows to the World stamp sets from Art Impressions. So this stamp set has a beautiful desert serene scene, and it has a very lovely quote that goes all the way around it. So to get started, I'm using my stamp platform, and I have a piece of Arches cold press watercolor paper. So I'm going to stamp the desert scene onto this piece 4 times, and I'm just going to show you how I did that with the first 2 images. To conserve some paper, I'm going to stamp the second image right next to it. It's going to ruin that quote that goes around, but that's okay because I won't be using it this time. To do the other 2, I just flip the paper around and did the same thing so that I can have all 4 squares on one piece of watercolor paper. And then I'm also going to use some clear embossing powder. This is from Shier Arts. I don't have a whole lot left. It's running out. It's been hanging in there for the last couple of years. I do use this quite a bit. I like using the clear embossing powder with a black pigment ink like the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink that I'm using, because it's just a very easy way to get a nice glossy black embossing. It's really easy to watercolor when you have that embossing. It just creates like wells for your color to go. So once I heat set the embossing powder, I can go ahead and start painting with my markers. And today I'm going to be using some Tombow dual brush pens. I don't think I've ever actually used the Tombow ones. I used the Marvies pens a long time ago to do like a similar watercolor technique. I did make a quick little swatch of my colors that I'm using. These are all from the Tombow dual brush pens in the bright set. I just wanted some really bright, vibrant colors for summer. For that top left one, that really is not a very good representation of that more dark pink red marker. I did combine it with the orange to make it a little more of a red color. I also have a Niji water brush. This is my favorite water brush. And I also have the Art Impressions palette. I did introduce this to my channel in a different video about stamp cleaning. A different way that you could use this watercolor palette if you choose to do that. And I have some other ideas there. If you'd like to check that out, I'll have it linked below also. And what I'm going to do is actually just start coloring straight to the paper with the markers. Now I did do this a little slower with the pink and the purple for that ground level, which did make the marker sink into the watercolor paper a little more, and it kind of dried, so you get some very harsh lines where you actually drew on that marker to the paper. But that's kind of easily remedied by just adding more of that same color around the area. You can kind of camouflage that pretty easily. I would definitely recommend coloring in small batches and taking that water directly to that paper as soon as you have scribbled down some of that marker. So for my first one, I kind of kept it pretty realistic for the colors that I have. I mean, you have a yellow sun, you have the green cactus, and then it gets a little funky with the other colors. It's all going to be weird anyways in the ends, because they're all going to have different colors for each element. So the sun will all be different colors, the mountains will be different colors, that middle ground will be a different color than the foreground, and then the blooming cactus will also be different colors. The very large cactus is going to be green throughout all 4 of this saguaro cactus. I haven't seen these large cactuses yet in person. It's a trip that my husband and I really want to take down to, I think it's southern Arizona, to see those. So hopefully one day. But until then, I can color them up with some watercolors. That's really not the same. Anyways, it was kind of fun just to let loose and play with color and not worry about the realism of the color of what I'm coloring. So after the first 2 were done, I cut apart that piece of paper. That way those could be just set off to dry. And then for the other two, I'm going to kind of color them at the same time, switching between colors. I found this a little bit easier, so I think if I did this again, I would kind of do this with all 4 images. It was kind of easier to pick which colors were going to go where. And eventually I started to play around with some coloring, adding in some shadows. So with that really dark purple, I added some of that to the yellow on the cacti. That way it created a bit of a grayish shadow. I also took a bit of the blue to all the saguaro cactuses, all 4 of them. And then once the images were more dry, I also went over them with the Tombow marker just straight to where I had already watercolored, and that added even more depth too. I haven't actually played with watercolor markers in a long time. I said before that I had some Marvy ones back in the day, and I did have some of the Zig brush markers. I didn't really care for them, so they were something that I eventually sold off so that they went to a better home. Somebody that would play with them a little bit more than I was. I just wasn't reaching for them. So once I had all my images colored and I added even more color on top of that, I thought I got to a good stopping point. Like again, I was just playing around with the Tombow markers, just kind of learning about how they mix together. Just plain. It was just fun to just sit down and kind of play with something, a newer medium to me, something that I haven't played with in a long time. So once I was done coloring and they were all dry, I went ahead and I chopped off all the edges. That way I had 4 little square desert scenes. And then just to add a bit of cohesiveness, I went ahead and I inked all of the edges with a black Memento pen in Tuxedo Black. The only reason I have this pen is specifically for this reason. I just like the finished look that it gives. Since I'm playing with cactuses and the desert scene, I thought I would pull out the succulent set from Art Impressions. This is one of their newer sets. It's actually designed by Bonnie Krev's son, which I think is really fun. So I took one of the succulents and I'm just going to heat emboss it on a piece of vellum cardstock using some white embossing powder. And I'm just creating a small background for the sentiment, that small square that you kind of see at the top right hand side. This is just for you. My husband came home and he decided to interrupt me. I told him I was going to leave it in because I don't care. He just got home from work, so he was pretty dirty for that day. So I also took one of the smaller squares from the square double stitch die. And I cut out some fun foam, and all of these colors actually match the suns. So I was just playing around with color, just coordinating. Definitely not a necessary step. You could just use white craft foam or foam tape, whatever you have. But since I have all this colorful craft foam that I like to use as a dimensional for my stamp images, I thought it would be fun to kind of color coordinate. So the one with the blue sun has the blue foam behind it. Totally unnecessary. I also cut down a piece of Simon Says Stamp slate gray cardstock to 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. I mounted that to a A2 size card base, which is A2 is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I do get those white bands on the top and bottom. I like to leave a bit of white space with my cards. And then I use the same Thermoweb Ultra Bond liquid glue to adhere the desert images mounted onto that craft foam to that dark gray cardstock. I try to leave a bit of space between each square, that way it was centered. And then I added that white heat embossed succulent on vellum paper to the middle, turning it slightly just to make a diamond shape. I wanted to add a bit more to the sentiment for this card, so I also used the Sending Hugs from the succulent set. So the entire sentiment of this card says, "Sending hugs just for you." Alright guys, that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one. Meh, meh.